Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be back with you all this morning. I get this opportunity every few months to be able to come and spend some time here in Haywards Heath and really to spend time with you, the people of God. And that's the great pleasure of this season, that opportunity to be with God together. So thank you. I want to thank you first as a church for your continued support. Thank you. I don't know whether it's my height, but it's sometimes hard to see over these things. I want to thank you as a church for your support. You pray for me, you give, and you're part of what God is doing throughout North Africa and the Middle East. And despite what we see on the news, God is still at work. Sometimes it takes the eye of faith to see that, because it's very hard to live in contact with your friends in Lebanon and find that on the day of a ceasefire, within a 10-minute period, there were 200 bombings. But God is still God. A friend sent me some lines from a song, and it said, "Though the wrong still seems so strong, you are Creator yet." And it's that truth that we hold on to, isn't it, as we celebrate this story of suffering. We've just come out of Easter, haven't we? And there's this incredible story of loss, of suffering. We kind of like to get past Good Friday and Saturday and get to Sunday because there's resurrection. And that's the truth, isn't it? There is resurrection. But everything that goes before is a part of that story as well. I've lived for nearly 45 years now in cultures other than my own Australian culture. One of the things that's challenging about living in other cultures is accepting the gift of hospitality that is often given so generously. It's not that I didn't experience hospitality at home. In many ways, I do what I do today because of the missionaries that came through my parents' home, even though we lived on the poor side of the railway line in the small country town where we lived in Australia. But I've still struggled to accept the generosity of those in the slums on the edge of Rawalpindi in Pakistan. I lived for several weeks with a family in a very poor area of Pindi as I was learning the language. I shared a bed with two of their daughters. I was much younger then, so personal space probably had a little bit more flexibility to it. I don't know if I could do that now. But I shared the bed with two of their daughters because that was the space that they had, and they generously offered me their hospitality. And I have continued to visit them from time to time over the years when I'm able to go back to Pakistan. And each time they send one of the children out to buy a bottle of cold soft drink. We might not think that's much, but those kids don't get to drink that. It's given to me to drink. It's really hard to take that. When I was in Egypt, living in Upper Egypt in the south, that's great, isn't it? Upper is south. But I was living there and we were invited to a wedding in one of the villages. It was a family from the Orthodox church there. There were a number of us foreigners who were working in that area at the time, and we were all invited. And we were given a special place. They had cleaned out where the animals normally are kept, fresh hay on the floor, and that's where we got to eat the banquet. The problem was the banquet was this large chunk of meat, and that's the best way I can describe it, a chunk of meat. It was very generous because they don't actually eat a lot of it. But it was so tough that I, as a foreigner, found it incredibly difficult to chew even one mouthful of it, let alone to deal with. How do you accept that generous hospitality that even sometimes comes at such a cost? And as I think I've shared here before, when I've been in Mauritania, we visit a school run by a woman in a slum. She's from that slum, that's her life as well. But piece by piece, she has built a school for the children in that area who are excluded. She sells vegetables door to door. She sells fish door to door in that area. So the money comes from that area. We're talking about a few pence in order to build that school. I went there with the board of ACT because they do monitoring visits to check on our work, to evaluate and ensure that we continue to serve the purposes that God's given us. And she presented each one of us. There were 11 of us visited. She presented each one of us with a gift of cloth, traditional cloth. Incredible generosity. I have no idea what it cost her. And everything within you rebels against accepting that gift, and yet you accept it as an honour to those who seek to honour you. John 21 is our reading, and as I found myself sitting in this chapter over the last couple of weeks, I've been drawn to this theme of hospitality. So bear with me, because I hope that together we can discover something this morning of God's incredible, generous hospitality. Actually, it's a theme God's had me thinking about all Easter. Because I was listening to a friend of mine in Lebanon share at an online forum that I run with the When Women Speak network. And she posed a question that has had me circling around the cross and Jesus' death and his suffering. And this is what she asked. Can hospitality endure amid suffering? Can hospitality endure amid suffering? Now in John 21, we've got this act of hospitality as we typically imagine it. Have I moved on? I've probably moved on a couple of times since then. There we go, we missed that one. Forgot that I had the thing, thank you. In John 21, we get this typical image that there's a meal prepared, there's an invitation to come and to share that meal. There's generosity and servanthood and giving. But there's so much more. Henry Nouwen explains hospitality as spaciousness. He says this: hospitality means primarily the creation of free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place. So I want to bring to us all, individually and together as a community of God's people this morning, I want to bring to us an invitation, the offer of the hospitality of God. It's an invitation this morning for us into a space where there's an opportunity for change and transformation for all of us, both as individuals and as a community of God's people together. I find it a place that is both humbling and full of hope. Now we know the story, don't we? It's a story that we've been working through over these past weeks, listening to it, meditating, letting God speak to us. It's a story of immense suffering. Not just experienced by Jesus, but experienced by many who were around him. His mother stood there at the foot of the cross and watched her son die the most agonizing death and suddenly understood for the first time that prophecy, a sword will pierce your heart. His disciples, they'd given up everything, their careers. They dedicated 3 years to walking with Jesus. And when the story goes towards this climax of Jesus' arrest and crucifixion, they run for their lives. All that they dreamed and hoped of seemed to be lost. And we could talk about the individuals and communities who'd experienced Jesus' touch in so many ways of healing, of provision, of teaching. And now the question was, what is truth? Does it really exist? But then the story flips on its head, doesn't it? Because Jesus isn't just dead. Suddenly he rises from the dead. Everything that anybody understood was suddenly incomprehensible. So we're in a time of great upheaval, of disconcerting experiences, of confusion. I personally don't enjoy times of confusion, of uncertainty. I would much rather be in another place. And it's in this space that Peter says, I'm going fishing. You know, when everything is uncertain, we want to cling to something that is certain. I don't know what your certainties are. I often retreat into a book. Simply read. But Peter retreated to fishing, and some of the disciples joined with him. Because he needed something he understood, something that was certain. Although I suspect for those of us who watch you who fish, we might say that there's not much that's very certain about fishing either, is there? But I often wonder whether Peter thought, stop the world, I want to get off. Because the security of everything that was known had been turned into turmoil. After catching fish, there in the early part of John 21, they reluctantly follow the advice of someone on the shore. There's always someone who knows better, isn't there? Throw your nets over the other side. We've thrown our nets out for the last 6 hours and there's not a fish in this sea. Why do you think it's going to be over the other side? But they do, and that leads to a miraculous catch, and as a result of that catch, they recognise the person on the shore is Jesus. And that leads them then as he invites them to have breakfast, which he's prepared for them. And then he engages Peter in that conversation that we read. And what it does is bring healing to a man who was struggling with failure after he denied Jesus, whom he loved. It wasn't that he didn't love Jesus, but overwhelmed with circumstances, he denied him. Jesus, the Christ who died and the Christ who is risen. Jesus, God in flesh, but broken and vulnerable and yet resurrected and triumphant. Jesus, who carries the wounds that were part of his suffering. Jesus, who felt the pain of being forsaken. My God, why? Why have you forsaken me? This Jesus demonstrated in a real physical encounter the hospitality of God that is offered through his death and resurrection. And this hospitality is more than just the offer of a meal, although the meal is an integral part of it. So what is it that we see? We see that hospitality is a place of encounter. Someone said you can't offer hospitality as a monologue. You've got a bit of a monologue here this morning because I'm just speaking, aren't I? But that's not hospitality. Hospitality requires relationship. It requires giving and receiving. It requires community. And hospitality, the importance of it is that it opens up the opportunity for relationship. Because we welcome the other, be they stranger or friend. It's that place of encounter that welcomes, that sees the other person, that is attentive to the other person. New Zealand missiologist and a friend and colleague of mine, Cathy says this. She says, hospitality begins with seeing the other person, with that act of recognition, a powerful act indeed. It requires looking the other person in the eye and the establishment of relationship, that fundamental act of hospitality. Why? because it acknowledges people's humanity, it accords them dignity, and it denies that they're invisible. On the shore on that early morning, Jesus embodies that invitation from God into relationship. Many have tried to describe what Peter must have felt, and I guess we all describe it from our own place of dealing with failure. But here was the man who'd so boldly and publicly declared, "I will never deny you. Everyone else might run away, but not me." And then, as one of the gospel writers records, as the cock crowed, the rooster crowed, Jesus turned and looked at him, and the whole weight of what he had just done fell upon Peter. And he went out and wept. And so Jesus offers now to Peter a welcoming space that sees Peter. Jesus has looked Peter in the eye at the point of failure, and Jesus looks at Peter now in that point of re-establishing his relationship. One of the things that happens as Jesus is present to Peter is that Peter's deep sense of failure is given a different place of orientation, a different point of reference. You know how it is sometimes when something happens. When the pain comes, whatever it is, whether it's our failure or suffering, whether it's events and circumstances, we're left disoriented. And when we try to look at the world and at people and at ourselves through all of that, we don't know whether we're looking up or down, left or right. Where are we looking? And what happens for Peter here is that Jesus offers him himself as the way through which Peter can look at his world. Peter can look at his failure. Yes, it happened. He did it. It's not erased. It happened. But he gets to look at that failure through different eyes. Not his deep sense of, why did I do it? But a deep sense of Jesus saying, yes, you did it, my brother. But you're my friend. I offer you relationship. I offer you belonging. I offer you a place of identity. So Peter and how he felt were no longer the lens through which Peter oriented himself in his world. They weren't the lens through which he understood who he was. He now understood his identity afresh as Jesus invites him into this safe space for change and transformation. He now sees himself through the eyes of Jesus. Jesus becomes his point of reference. And this is the offer of God's hospitality for each one of us. For us as a community of people, for us as individuals. Encounter with God is an invitation into relationship that gives shape to our relationship, the way we see ourselves, our world, and others. But this is one of the ones that really excites me, because hospitality is actually the proclamation of the good news. Hospitality, getting someone in your home, isn't just the opportunity to speak to them. The very act of welcoming someone, of seeing them, of hearing them, of understanding, of giving attention to them, is itself a proclamation of God's welcome to them, into relationship with him. I live and work in parts of the world, well, I don't, I live in the UK, although it is quite difficult sometimes to talk about Jesus here. But I work in parts of the world, in North Africa and the Middle East and sometimes South Asia, where speaking about Jesus, proclaiming, which for us is always so important, but proclaiming is really quite difficult to do. There's laws against it. I still value my head. I prefer not to lose it yet. And I prefer not to create difficulty for others by following the way I've been brought up, where I must always speak. You can tell I like speaking anyway, so, But what I find in Jesus' invitation to Peter here is that Jesus embodies the true experience, gives Peter that true opportunity to experience God's love and acceptance. It's very physical, it's very real. And we as God's people can offer that experience to others as well. Jason Porterfield, in his book Fight Like Jesus, which seems a bit of an odd title, but it goes through the Passion Week, and it looks at the way that Jesus dealt with the conflict that he was facing at each step. And he speaks in this way about community. He says that community has the potential to create space into which others can be invited so that they might experience God's love. No longer will they simply hear about the love of Christ. No longer will they no longer merely see God's love being demonstrated. In community, people can actually experience God's transforming love. The welcome God offers is not an abstract ideal. God seeing, listening, offering a safe place to know him and to know ourselves, it's not a theory that we talk about. Hospitality is to offer the experience of being seen and being heard, of being welcomed, of experiencing God's love. But hospitality in its deepest form reflects that self-giving of Christ. It's a welcome that's defined not by comfort or status or ceremony. It's a welcome that's defined by risk and vulnerability. Philippians 2. Talking of Jesus, it says, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. As Jesus welcomes Peter and the disciples who were with him, we glimpse in a new way the welcome of risk and vulnerability. Jesus has been humiliated, forsaken, shamed. He gave up glory and all he got for it was suffering. He was abandoned and tortured. And yet he offers to the one who would deny his very existence or that he even knew him, he offers God's gracious welcome. He made himself vulnerable in order to create a space of acceptance and an opportunity for Peter, to create an opportunity for encounter and relationship. Jesus draws Peter and the disciples into gracious love and mercy of God as he offers hospitality that overcomes barriers, that orients them towards God, that points them to a future living in relationship with God. And that's what hospitality does. It creates future, a sense of future, and a hope. Jesus creates a vision of future for Peter. It's not a future he will face alone. It's not a future he's called to live out alone. It's not a future that is portrayed as so ethereal as to be so ethereally unbelievable. The hospitality of God connects past, present, and future. We've said it before, Peter has failed and he no longer believes there's a future for himself. But Jesus comes and he creates a safe space. He offers Peter renewed relationship with God. He offers Peter belonging and identity. Let's look for just a minute at the way that Jesus engages with Peter. While it seems that Peter became frustrated with the same question being repeated to him, Jesus uses that to draw him into their relationship. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, I've just told you. You know I love you. Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And suddenly Peter understands that Jesus sees his heart. That he understands that in the very depth of Peter's being there is a deep love for him. Yeah, he failed, but he still loved him. And that's what Jesus draws Peter into. Do you love me was an invitation back to the heart of hospitality, God's welcome and love. Grace extended in frailty and fragility. So Jesus starts with relationship. The hospitality of God doesn't put us into boxes that limit how we belong or who we are. Do you notice his commission to Peter? Feed my sheep. Take care of my lambs. Feed my sheep. I wonder if Peter's mind went back to the stories that he'd heard Jesus tell about sheep and shepherds. And Jesus says the sheep know the voice of the true shepherd and they'll always follow them. Someone who's only hired, Jesus says in one of his parables, they run away when there's trouble. But the owner will stick there. Jesus is saying to Peter, I trust you into the relationship of participating with what I'm doing in my world. You are part of my family. Therefore, what is around you, the people that I give to you, I trust you with them because you will not run away. And as in inviting Peter to lean into this relationship, Jesus includes him in his purposes. And Peter's also given a future, a hope. You might ask as we read those last verses, where is hope when Jesus spells out for him the suffering that lies ahead? The future as Jesus sees it, as Jesus describes it, is not normally what we would see as a message of hope. You're going to become an old man who's led around by others and you're not going to have very much control over who you are, where you go, or what happens to you. Great message of hope. If I left you with that this morning, you'd be pretty devastated going into this week, wouldn't you? But notice what Jesus says in verse 19. It says that Jesus, having described what Jesus says, it says Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death, great, he's going to die, by which Peter, not by which Peter would die, but by which Peter would glorify God. That's hope. That even in the worst that happens, God can be glorified. God is glorified. That's hope. I had a text from my friend Shadden in Lebanon the day after the day of the 8th of April, after those bombings. I have no idea what to say to her. The only thing I could come back to was words like these. Shadden, I have no answers, but I hold you to the God who will be glorified, because that's the truth of who he is. And so you see that there is a future because it's centered on God who offers hospitality, who invites us in. And the invitation to Peter and to us is to be able to say, as Jesus said in John 17, chapter 4, I've brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. So there is a future beyond what we can create for ourselves, beyond what this world can create for us. But it's a future that's here in this world because it's how we live and work and express the love and heart of God that brings glory to the Father now. That's the invitation. Well, we could add much more, couldn't we? We could take all of these things and explore how they call us to live as those God uses to offer hospitality to the world. We could ask what it means to create a safe space of welcome and acceptance as a community of God's people. In a world that's increasingly polarised, where power and bully tactics at the most global level are destroying life for millions of people, We could ask what it is to truly give up power, to offer hospitality that fosters peace and reconciliation. Faced with the sort of nationalism in all of our nations that creates our identification of others based on their difference, we could explore what it means to see the image of God in the other so that they too are invited into God's welcome and family. There are so many things that we could explore in this topic of hospitality that Jesus unfolds for us in a very practical experience of God's love in John 21. But today, our invitation from God is to enter into his hospitality afresh. It's an invitation for us individually and together to enter into his welcome, to experience what it is to be seen and known by God. For those of us who are living joyfully in this space, enjoying the hospitality of God, the invitation is simply linger there. Experience God's love. There is always more, and he wants to pour it out upon us. For those of us who are longing for such a welcome, such a safe space, this is the invitation from God. You are welcome. He offers you a generous table of love, protection, and provision. For those of us like Peter who feel that we have failed so badly, his invitation is very simple. Come. I have a place prepared for you. And maybe you hear his question as he asked Peter, do you love me? Or maybe it's another question, but he offers you this welcome, his welcome. So wherever we are, whatever we bring, there's an invitation from Jesus this morning to enter into the presence and relationship of the triune God, to enter into the community of God and his people. You are not excluded. I am not excluded. We are not excluded. He has broken down the barriers. So come. As the music's come up, I think there's a song to end with, but we're just going to take some moments of silence first. What's the invitation God's got for you as an individual and for you as part of this community? Let's take some moments just to sit in that place where God offers you his welcome.